Is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Thinking Market. I'm podcasting solo today. Uh, the hunt for a co-host is still in pursuit. Um, if you like this show and you think you could be a good co-host, whether we know each other or not, you can shoot me an email or a DM, and I think maybe we can make it happen. But yeah, still podcasting solo. Uh, Anyways, what I want to discuss is a little bit about money and a little bit about menticide. Um, I have a little bit of a sore throat, so bear with me. But next weekend, I'm going to be lecturing for the Menger Institute on money. So I'm not going to go too much into the details and technical stuff here. I'd rather just talk about the good stuff. And what's the good stuff? To me, I think what is of most interest to lay people is inflation. What is inflation? I was listening to a good lecture by Murray Rothbard back from like 1989, 87 maybe, at Stanford University. I think it was for the Mises U, one of like the first Mises University programs, because they originally were at Stanford. But yeah, it was on the origin and nature of money, and the whole idea is like, to understand money, we have to go to its origin. And it was a great lecture. Rothbard, big fan. But regarding inflation, he said that the evil is not that prices go up. The evil is the creation of the resources, the new money, in the first place. This is essentially counterfeiting. This is what the Federal Reserve central banks do, is they have a legalized monopoly on the creation of money. So when you create new money, this is why money is different than like other goods in an economy. You want more abundance, more supply of other goods, because that means more supply. All else being equal, prices of each marginal unit of a supply of good, the marginal value of each good is lower. So the prices of goods decrease with more supply. But with money, creating more money doesn't produce any societal benefit. In fact, it does the opposite. The amount, once money makes it to the market, is optimal. Whatever the amount is, it's optimal. But when you create more money, the purchasing power of each individual monetary unit decreases. So actually, having more money or needing more money to buy the same amount of goods means you have a lower purchasing power. So think about like 1912 prices, 30 cents for a taxi, 50 cents for like a meal, a couple bucks for an acre of land. You need less money and it goes farther. But inflation essentially is the increase in the quantity of money. So now you need more money to buy the same amount of goods. And this is why, the harshest punishments you can receive from the government is for income tax evasion and counterfeiting. They will throw you in a cage and throw the key away because it interferes with their business, which is theft and counterfeit. That was a joke Rothbard made. I thought it was pretty funny, because theft being income taxation of your money, and counterfeiting being the production of money. That's what the Federal Reserve does. This is what the nature of government is. It's an inflationary institution. So they want to control that. They want to monopolize that, because it benefits them. Once they are with the snap of their fingers, they're the first producers of this newly created money via the central bank and the whole technical process of like issuing like T-bills, treasury bills, treasury bonds, buying back debt with the banking system. I'm not going to get into like the banking mechanics here, but this is like the technical process for essentially this counterfeit. And what the effect of this is wealth redistribution. When they produce new money, they now have more resources to buy the existing goods producers have produced and brought to the market. So once they have this money and they go to the market, they buy new goods, usually, the banks, friends of the banks. It usually goes into like real estate or the military industrial complex. Then there's a whole shift in the society structure of production towards producing military equipment, Raytheon, Boeing, Lockheed Martin, General Dynamics. And then you also have like this real estate shift of like lowering time preference because interest rates are now artificially lowered. The price of money is lowered. So we have to make a profit more immediately, which means we have a higher time preference for present consumption and investment and profits rather than later deferred consumption and profits. So then you have this whole like architectural minimalist movement, because why spend time on art when you can build something now? And then these are the shifts in society that manifest in not only architecture but the whole production structures. Okay, so then the central bankers with the snap of their fingers produce this new money. They get the money, they spend it in the market. Once it's spent in the market, prices adjust. Over time, prices adjust. They recognize, wow, there's more demand for these specific goods, so they increase their prices. Now, once money goes through the economy, the later receivers, the less fortunate people, as Mises referred to them, who receive the money later, have this money, but they have to spend it on the market once the prices have already adjusted. The initial receivers, the government, the banks, bankers, investment bankers, friends of the banks, got to spend the money in the market before prices adjusted. So the later receivers have to spend money in the market once prices have already adjusted. Now, prices are higher, and this is the distinction between real wages and nominal wages. People are used to nominal wages as representing a certain value, right? But the real wage is the real monetary purchasing power that you have in the market. What can you actually buy versus, what's declared on paper as a number. So the thing is, historically, up until about World War II, and other than times of war, people lived in a society of deflation, that like the products you were buying today over time were going to be actually cheaper in price. They were going to be lower in price because marginal productivity and technology increases at a certain rate. When something's invented, it just takes time before it can be mass produced. So things tend to get cheaper over time with increased technology and productivity. But during times of war, then the government comes in, they want to like tax more. That's usually when living standards would decrease and prices may go up because there's now like rationing. We have to give all our goods and services to the army and the government. And then essentially after World War II, and specifically in 1971, when we got off the gold standard officially, fully, we no longer experience this deflationary culture where we think prices of goods are going to go down. Now you may think like, oh, but like cars, don't they go down in price? But it's not the same good. A brand new car in a theoretical sense is a different good than a used car, right? So what we live in, and this is Professor Guido Holzman, a phenomenal professor, came out with a book last year called Abundance, Generosity, and the State. I have it here next to me. An inquiry into economic principles. And I'm going to fan out a little bit. I ran into him at the Madrid annual Austrian Economic Research Conference, and back in last year, 2020, or 2 years ago. And he mentioned his book. I mentioned my research, and he said, I hope my book can help your research, and I'm looking forward to reading it. Um, so in this book, he talks about inflationary culture, and there's some lectures he's given about it online. You can find on YouTube, but this idea of increasing time preference towards the present moment versus later moments is kind of what we're experiencing socially. This whole concept, I think, of like, I mean, brain rot, or seeing people like, essentially the way I think about it is when you look at socialist countries and you look at like poverty, there's more prostitution because people are selling the only thing they have, which is their bodies. So combined with technology, I think that's kind of the phenomena of online pornography and prostitution, OnlyFans, etc. Is um, this on one hand, it's related to, well, okay, so I think the better, more meta question is like regarding inflation culture and deflation culture. Deflation culture is that because of increasing technology and prices decreasing over time, because there's no, you know, indefinite increase in the money supply, which is inflation, we're getting richer, we're getting wealthier. So the question is, are we becoming more wealthy? Are our standards of living increasing at this moment, or are they decreasing? Kind of like this directional dynamic trend. Do we see ourselves becoming wealthier at this moment, or more impoverished in the general greater market, the social environment, when we look at our communities? And for me at this moment, with inflation, there was a statistic that like 40% of all money in existence was printed in like 2020, in the past 5 years, right? So basically, what this means is we're still producing goods. We still have an economy, yet we're producing more money, and this increase in money has the effect of essentially redistributing wealth. Where's the wealth going? It's going to corporations. We have welfare for corporations. It's going to the government. We have a military industrial complex. We have a state industrial complex. Because they can print money, don't have to rely directly on like income taxation. This is the roundabout way of gaining revenue from the citizenry. The government doesn't produce anything. It like contracts things out and then may nationalize it and whatnot and socialize it. But producers produce things. The government is like a child who just consumes and is on an allowance. But now he's bypassed asking for an allowance and just creates his allowance. So that's the counterfeiter in the economy. There's a good article Rothbard mentions by R.A. I have it here next to me. I'll mention the author. And I haven't read it, but I listened to Rothbard discuss it, so that's essentially the same thing as reading it. But it's R.A. Radford article, The Economic Organization of a POW Camp. And he talks about how in World War I, there was a British troop, British troops got imprisoned in like 1941, 39, somewhere at the beginning of the war. And they were in this camp and they were kept alive, but they had rations. So every month, like, these rations would come in, cans of sardines, cans of peaches, blah, blah, blah. And quickly, an economy emerged. So people were trading, bartering, blah, blah, blah. But cigarettes became the medium of exchange. So I'll trade you, half a cigarette for this. I'll trade you 2 cigarettes for that. So cigarettes became their form of money. And what happened was that towards the end of the war, people altruistically started sending in more cigarettes to the camps. But this screwed up the whole economy because now every day they set the prices of like what, a can of peaches, can of sardines were. And with the increase in supply of cigarettes, the prices went up. Prices went from like 2 cigarettes to 4 cigarettes of peaches, blah, blah, blah. So the prisoners started complaining like, what is this evil effect that's going on in our economy from unions or government or whatever. They were saying, I probably should have read the article, but the point is that they went they tried to impose price controls, and obviously that didn't work. Black markets emerged. The quality of the peaches went down. People were poisoning the peaches, blah, 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 yada, yada, yada. So they had to repeal the price controls. So that didn't work. And this is like, a micro economy that emerged. And I mean, I'm not really talking about money here as much as like inflation. Well, it's related, of course. Inflation is like a monetary phenomenon. It's not a psychological phenomenon. It's not a greed phenomena. Like, you have to, as Mises asked, where did these companies get the ability to ask for the increase in prices? It's because of the creation of this new money. And this is why the Federal Reserve, central banks, the institution of legalized counterfeiting is the most pernicious in society, because it directly can fund wars. As Randolph Bourne said, war is the health of the state. As long as there's wars that exist, this justifies the government. Because if there were no wars, what would we need the government for? We have markets. We can provide, education, security, jurisprudence, settling disputes. But people say, well, what if there's no invaders, right? What if there's no enemies who hate our freedoms overseas, right? Then there would be no really need for the state. So, yeah, they want to have wars everywhere. That's why 2020, we waged a war against an invisible enemy, namely a virus, and printed a whole bunch of money for it. And obviously this leads to the boom-bust cycle, because the new money is backed by nothing and prices have to adjust, and these businesses who are not satisfying consumers but rather existing as zombie companies off the loans from banks have to meet their maker. So, inflation culture, deflation culture. Yeah, if living standards are decreasing, then I that's why I think you have, an increase in I guess lower level, like it's almost a regression of society. I'm not really an anthropologist, I'm an economist, so I can discuss monetary phenomena better than social phenomena, but like my research, the economics of suicide, has led me to buying a bunch of books that overlap with psychology. A lot of these books on suicide come from the field of psychology. And I found this book by Joost Meerlo, who wrote this book in like the 1950s, called The Rape of the Mind. And it's a really incredible book. It's pretty intense. It's quite intense. It's really intense. But there's many concepts that he discusses throughout the book. I'm not even gonna. I can't even talk about all of them. It's like a 300-page book, if you're interested. But one concept is very interesting to me that he developed, or I heard for the first time, called Menticide, which is the murder of the mind. And I think this is, for me, such an important idea because it really connects suicide, self-murder, to homicide or genocide. Homicide, I think, being the murdering of a person, genocide being the murder of like a mass group of people, and democide being murder of one's own people by their own government. So so he's writing like after World War II and about this idea of torture, that like torture and propaganda were used to basically brainwash people and to like murder their mind. And this led to a bunch of people taking their own lives because they couldn't endure the torture. So to me, when I think of suicide, it's multivariable, but obviously I want to get even in economics, but also when it comes to like psychology, is this causal relation uh, sort of approach and understanding to both economics and psychology. Causal relations being that like there's a cause and effect to economic and social phenomena, as well as psychological phenomena. If you freaking look at, not you listeners, you beautiful people, but I'm talking to these professors and psychologists who think they um, are omniscient. But yeah, if you just look at human history, most people weren't quote unquote depressed or anxious or having mental disorders. So I think that it's a causal relation of creating all this. And my whole contention with so much of like neoclassical modern economics and why people freaking don't want to study economics is because it reduces everyone to mere like function. Um, but I'll get to that in a second. I just want to mention that like Mirlo has this chapter where he talks about the fear of living and this idea that like yeah, like there is this fear of death, but that's kind of rather an old idea of psychology, that like people are afraid to die. He's saying that there's a fear of living. People are afraid of freedom. And this goes to the H.L. Mencken quote that the average man does not want to be free, he simply wants to be safe. That the average person does have this fear of being alive, this fear of being spontaneous, this fear of being existing in freedom, um, because there's like a bottom up order that needs to be adopted, right, or created by each person. um but things like religion and things like, and religion's not all bad, but things like religion, things like the state are ways to give people structure and order so they don't have to do it themselves. So that's why actually and like the totalitarian needs conformists as conformists need a totalitarian leader. Um, it's warm, it's safer, it's easier to live that way rather than trying to live freely as a pioneer or an artist. Um, so he talks about this fear of living as regressing people into a state of being half alive. And I think this term alive has like a definition, a multiple definitions. On one hand, being alive obviously means being not dead, being having a breath, having a conscious, uh, being spirited. But on the other hand, like I'm thinking of the scene of The Matrix where Neo takes the red pill and he wakes up in the pod and he's connected to all the tubes. And it's like at that moment he becomes like, well, conscious, awake, but like if you look at, all the people in the pods, they're alive on one hand, but they're not living life. So in this sense, I think it's a good way to kind of distinguish like someone being like asleep throughout life, being half alive. And I think a lot of people, I really don't understand, because I can talk to people and like obviously everyone I talk to seems pretty awake, but I really don't know, like, this whole idea of, what does it mean to be half alive? What does it mean to be fully alive? I've definitely met some people where I'm like, a few, but some where I'm like, okay, this person is like alive. And I think that's what I admire and I want to strive for. Is to be like fully alive, fully awake, fully conscious, fully just trying to understand what's going on. I don't have all the answers. I don't think anyone has all the answers. But like continuously asking questions and trying to learn and trying to create and just trying to live, trying to produce uh is like, I think can help someone try to be alive. If you're just trying to pioneer and create your own way, like, you have to be more alive than asleep to do such things. Um, so yeah, this idea of menticide, like murdering someone's mind, that's what the state really is good for. And like Mirlo writes a lot about education as being like this quantomania, speedomania. Like, if we just give people information, then they don't have room to think for themselves. And, homework as like even desanctifying the home as a place where the state can enter, and like children don't have the freedom to think for themselves. I mean, just look at like the education rates in this country to help infer whether or not public education is a success or failure. The average American adult, and maybe it's changed over the last couple of years, but since a couple of years ago, has a reading level of a sixth grader. So, um, maybe I'll talk about education in the future. I probably will, but what modern economics is this neoclassical mathematics. Like, most people on the street, when you tell them like ask them what's economics, they may say it's like mathematic formulas, and that's the quantitative version, the mathematical version of economics. But there's also literary economics, and actually literary economics, as Carl Menger Jr. discussed, is much more elegant and actually much more informative, because the mathematical curves have to exclude so much of the substance of opportunity costs, of subjective values that people, if offered in choice, would potentially, you know, choose and act upon and live, according to their values. But this mathematical equation like has to reduce people to mere functions, and this functioning is what I think a lot of modern psychology is. Like this idea, this formulating aspect of like, oh, it's a chemical imbalance in the brain, is bullshit. Um, I think that's the causal relation aspect I'm trying to discuss, is that like there's social influences to why people feel certain ways. Obviously, there's internal influences of ideas, but this is the, where do ideas come from? Well, there's more often than not like social influences for people's ideas. Like, what are they consuming? What are they forced to consume? From like education or mass media, or um, you know, even food. Like the gut microbiome affects people, definitely. But Mirlo writes too, like how a lot of times people's political orientations are a influence of their parental relations, right? If you had a if you don't like your parents, maybe you're more inclined to be like a totalitarian type or a conforming type. Um, Things like this, which I'm not too savvy about, but I find it very, very interesting. And the whole thing is like, this constructionist idea of trying to justify more power to the government. Obviously, when prices go up, the government is saying, well, give us more power so we can impose price controls. But also this idea that, like, you know, we're here to take care of you uh, by the government. Um, and formulating everything, like, reduces people. You know what I mean? If they're just given this certain formula of nutritions and lifestyle, then, like, then their serotonin levels will increase, and by definition they'll be happy. And it's like, wow, like, there's no room to consider the life of pioneers, of artists, the people who actually want to live differently, want to go their own way, don't want to necessarily be happy, but want to fucking create stuff. Um, that's why the government is antithetical to civilization, because civilization is dependent on artistry. Artistry can apply to anything. If you make tacos, that's an art in itself. How do you make your tacos? This qualitative aspect rather than pure quantitative aspect. If you look at, like, the word statistics, uh, the etymology of it comes from stat, and that means state. And Lenin said the first institution of the government should be that the Department of Statistics. Yeah. So I want to conclude with the last paragraph of Mirlo's book, The Rape of the Mind. As some food for thought, where he writes, and this is like halfway through the last paragraph, where he writes, compared with the million-year span of human existence and evolution, civilization is still in its infancy. Despite historical reversals, man continues to grow, and psychology, no matter how imperfect now, will become one of man's most powerful tools in his struggle for freedom and maturity. So we have to develop our minds if we want to be free. And I think reading is for the mind as lifting weights is for the body. It just makes you stronger. But beyond that, I think beyond the books, we have to live and continue to think. And I don't know. I think he's so right about that. That we have to develop our own psychologies if we ever want to really be free in spirit first, and then going outward. So, thank you very much, and I will talk to you guys later. Peace.